actual presentation. It was just basically 5 slides about me, and we don't need that. So I'll introduce myself, and we'll just kind of go around the room real quick. Basically, what I'd like to know from you guys is, what school district are you with? How familiar are you with PowerShell or Bash scripting or scripting in general? And what are you hoping to kind of learn and accomplish today as far as being in this class? So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Charlie Weber. I've been teaching Introduction to PowerShell and PowerShell scripting for a very long time. I first offered this class at HISTE back in 2016, 2017, and have kind of offered it as requested here at ACOT since. I got into PowerShell scripting because I was a one-man IT shop for a little school district west of Bentonville called Decatur, and this was basically my lifeblood to make it so that I could manage my day in, day out job without killing myself, because I use PowerShell to automate account creation from Cognos down to AD, and then I sync AD up to Google and Azure, so that I no longer have to deal with help desk tickets of, hey, this kid needs their account created. Are they in e-school? No, but when they're in e-school, an hour later, everything gets made.
That sounds familiar.
So it was that process doesn't work for everybody. I discovered when talking with a school district that several people want my first class on this, like, that won't work for us. So like, why not? Well, because that kid shows up in their parent is still filling out their paperwork, and we're sending the kid to class. The counselor's already given them a temporary schedule, and we need to be handing them a device, because we're a one-to-one school district, and they need to be able to log in. Like, well, you can't automate it if there's no data behind it. So I learned PowerShell out of necessity for my job, and since then I've continued to use PowerShell to make my life easier. Don Jones, one of the guys who writes if you really want to get into the PowerShell world, he has a book called Learn PowerShell in a Month of Lunches. It has a bunch of really easy exercises. He does a really good job of explaining some of the nuances and weirdness of PowerShell. And so I highly recommend that book. It's Learn PowerShell in a Month of Lunches. There's also a bunch of people that have basically taken that book and put it on YouTube, and recording them reading the book basically and doing the exercises with you. So even if you don't want to read it, you can find it on YouTube. With that said, that book heavily influenced a lot of what this class kind of goes over, because we're going to start really basic with just getting familiar with the command line window, what it is. We'll talk about the PowerShell structure, how everything is set up, and then we'll kind of progress from there. We'll run some commands on our own computer. We don't need to hit an active directory or anything that we'll see. And then probably after lunch, we'll get into some of the stuff about PowerShell profiles, and I'll show you a modified version of mine and why I have it set up that way, and we can kind of just talk through this. This class is designed to be highly interactive, so don't feel like asking a question or wanting us to go back and take some time with something is going to disrupt me. Like, we're going to get done. We're going to cover everything. The goal is for you guys. My goal for this class is for you guys to feel comfortable using PowerShell, so that when you hear Craig Millsap or other people say on sysadmin, hey, have you gone to the Arkansas K-12 GitHub? That when you read the documentation Craig and I have written on there, that you guys feel comfortable following it and implementing some of those projects. So that's my goal. That's a little bit about me. If you guys have any other questions about me, again, feel free to ask, and we'll just start going around the room right over here.
Chris Haley with Pulaski County Special School District. My team is responsible for student data, similar to what, making sure that students, we're are in each school properly. We're responsible for cycle reporting, things like that. I'm fairly familiar, comfortable enough with scripting and programming to be able to Google the answers if I don't know it right off the top of my head. And we do it primarily for automation purposes as well, like supplying student data to various softwares.
I'll start. Summer's working. Bobby Dunn with Pulaski County Schools as well. I'm data center admin, server admin, and I guess what I want to get out of today is just a better understanding of the base use of PowerShell and how to find and get to the access or the data that I'm after.
Awesome.
Summer Young, Little Rock School District. I'm in charge of all the state reporting and Cognos reports and pulling data out of Cognos. And we already use a bunch of like Windows command line batch scripts, but we've started using PowerShell for a few things, and I just really want to make sure I understand it better and can write some on my own.
Christy Morris, also school district. I kind of just want to see what it does and how it can help me.
Awesome.
I'm Dustin Graham from the Berryville School District. I'm network admin there. I've used PowerShell a couple of times on and off, but I'm mostly at the stage where you copy and paste from Google, and if it doesn't work, try the next copy and paste from Google. So I really liked what you started with earlier. Sounds pretty great for us. Our students have both Google and Windows accounts, so having one of them automated would be great.
You can automate both of them. I will help you get that done.
Nice.
I'm Brittany Swigert. I work for Pulaski County Special School District, and it's my boss, but I'm just here to see how this can make my life easier every day.
Awesome.
Mike Foy. I'm probably one of the only ones from Louisiana, Caldwell Parish School District. We are about to set up Active Directory. We're already a school district, so I'm trying to learn everything I can about PowerShell. Know nothing about it. So.
Yeah.
John Delaney, Great Roots Co-op. I know some PowerShell, not a lot, but I've got districts that are trying to do exactly what you've described, so it'd be nice to be able to help them a little better.
Matt Jones, White County Central. Not worked with PowerShell at all. Just trying to figure out how to make my life easier. So.
Chris Hopkins, Whitehall School District. Just want to base knowledge of PowerShell and see how I can use it.
Drew Laughinghouse with Garden School District, and I'm super dangerous with PowerShell. Like, my boss is a little nervous. So, I'll get in there. We just recently implemented a lot of your stuff.
Awesome.
Yeah. Todd Matthews, Pea Ridge School District. Know a little bit about PowerShell and scripting, but mostly like Google, implement. Hoping to learn more, understand more about my job.
Brandon Ellis with Pulaski County Special School District. Work with Chris Haley and his department. I'm just hoping to learn PowerShell.
Awesome. All right, guys. Well, we're gonna kind of jump right in to you learning PowerShell. So if you have your computers, go ahead and open it up. You can open up PowerShell. One of the things that we'll quickly learn, and want to make sure everyone understands, there's two versions of PowerShell that you can be running. If you're wanting to implement anything from the Arkansas K-12 GitHub, you may need both. Because while PowerShell 7 is supposed to be fully backwards compatible, we have found that there are just some things that don't work properly in PowerShell 7, which is the newest version of PowerShell. Whereas PowerShell 5 is what shipped with Windows 10. And so we generally try to make everything work for PowerShell 7, and when we have to, we drop it back down to PowerShell 5. We'll probably primarily be playing in PowerShell 5 because that's what's installed by default on most of our computers, even Windows 11. But PowerShell 7 you can download from Microsoft. It looks like this. PowerShell 7 is open source and will run on a Linux or a Mac OS. The biggest difference with PowerShell 7 is you can't run Active Directory commands on it because Active Directory relies on some underlying Windows .NET frameworks that do not exist within the open source like .NET Lite that has been packaged with PowerShell 7. So know that you can run and do a lot of really cool stuff on a Mac or a Linux server. There's actually a guy in Northwest Arkansas at West Fork that his entire district is Linux, and he has converted some of our, like the Cognos downloader and the Cognos module, so that it works for him on Linux. But Windows is pretty cheap. I'm not going to, argue with him on why he decided to make his life challenging, but good for him. But he can do it. So PowerShell 7 also will automatically keep itself, once you're running 7.2 or later, it integrates with Windows Update so that it stays up to date. You can actually have it just pull updates constantly through Windows Updates. You used to have to manually go in and do an update and stuff. Now it's built into the Windows Update rings and update NWSUS directly. So for those that are security conscious out there, don't worry about PowerShell 7 because it can keep itself up to date. It's one less thing that we have to probably worry about too much. So you can jump back over to PowerShell 5. Command line, you can just type it onto it. You get wonderful red text usually that blows up. That's probably really hard for you guys to see, huh?
Yeah, I gotta move up here, sorry.
So
I can't see.
one of the things that you can actually do is if you right click on the top ribbon and you go down to properties, it brings up the properties for the windows. For that window. It's usually, from what I've seen, it usually is persistent, but we'll see. So maybe I need to set my text, since I'm presenting, to something bigger, like 36. And I would say do Comic Sans, but Microsoft doesn't even give me that as an option. So I guess I'll pick Courier New instead. Now if I type in there, is that a little bit easier to see and read? So you can change your font sizes, the fonts directly. You can even change the colors that you want by default. I could set it to use the black versus the blue, which PowerShell 5 defaults to the blue console window. PowerShell 7 will always default to the black. I have found that very helpful when helping school districts, and I tell them to open PowerShell, they open it, and they go, the Cognos module isn't working, or the Clever downloader isn't running. Well, it's because those require PowerShell 7. I see a blue background, I immediately know you're in the wrong version of PowerShell. So there we go. So any questions about kind of the properties and how you can customize the layout of your console window? Okay. One of the key aspects of PowerShell 2 is that you can use this to update itself. So I can do update help. And what that does is it actually goes out online and pulls down all of the different help modules and things to update the help. Now the command is update-help. In PowerShell, you will find that everything is what is called a verb-noun configuration.
Excuse me.
Yes.
You have access to the internet here.
Yes. So, open a notepad real quick. So this is what I was told the password is for the Hilton Honors meeting.
Oh.
So you connect to Hilton Honors meeting. It's an open Wi-Fi. It'll ask you for a guest password, and lit standard is the password that you want to use to get onto the internet. means claim to be a PowerShell master. I still Google. Actually, I've stopped Googling PowerShell commands. I use ChatGPT. ChatGPT is my junior dev that I will debug the code that it gives me because I am just dangerous enough I know enough to look at it and go, that's wrong, ChatGPT. And the people that I work with outside of K-12, there's some really cool AI engineers that I'm networking with, and we all talk about AI a lot. And most of us say our future is not in creating AIs, but just being prompt engineers. That's kind of the running joke. I'm no longer a programmer, I'm a prompt engineer, and then I debug the AI as my junior dev. Now, PowerShell runs on the verb noun configuration. PowerShell is also case insensitive, where it doesn't care, whereas if you've done any other scripting in the past, you know that case sensitivity matters. And for PowerShell, until you get to some of the commands in PowerShell 7, it doesn't care. And even the case insensitivity in PowerShell 7 is hit or miss. Because with PowerShell 7, Microsoft has tried to bring it into kind of more modern, mainstream mindset where you have people that are doing bash scripts and things on Linux because it can be used to administer Linux servers, and Linux servers are case sensitive. So you will find some case sensitivity in PowerShell 7. But for the most part, if you're running PowerShell and you're running standard commands against Active Directory and Windows servers, you're not going to be running into issues with case sensitivity. Whether or not that's best practice in programming, programmers will argue about till the cows come home. I've done 2 different back-end programming classes. One person swore by camel case, another person hated camel case. And what camel case would be is the first word is always lowercase, the second word you capitalize. For all your variables and all those things. So any questions about PowerShell's command structure with that verb noun configuration? One of the cool things too with PowerShell is you can tab complete. So I want to say get verb. So I can do just get ver and then tab, and it finishes the command. If there are multiple versions of a command, you can continually kind of tab through and it cycles through. One of the biggest commands that I tend to do that with the autocomplete and cycling through is Azure AD Sync. Because I can import the Azure AD module, and then I can say start-AD, and I just tab through till it says sync, and then I start running through the different sync types that I want, so I can force my sync at any point. By default, Azure AD syncs every 30 minutes, and that's the fastest that it can sync. So if you're in one of those situations where, I don't know, you want to kick all of your automation off and you want to have everybody live at the same time, so you pull a report out of Cognos, which you can do with PowerShell. You create the AD account, you do that with PowerShell. You can create the account in Google through the Google Cloud Directory Sync or GAM, whichever you prefer. And then you can kick over to your Azure AD Sync and force that sync so that by the time that script finishes, you have full confidence that that identity exists in all those places. Because otherwise, what ends up happening is you create the local AD account, the Google account gets created, and then the Azure account gets created sometime in the next 30 minutes. which for most people, as a process, that's fine, but if you're in a spot where you know, like, I need this done now, that's a way to do it.
Do you have a syllabus for this?
I do not have because the presentation nuked, it went away. Which is very disheartening when I was just reading it last night to be ready for you guys. We will do get verb if you run that in your console. You'll see these are a list of all the verbs. And then they get grouped by, is it a common thing? So common verbs are things that basically apply to every command that you will find within PowerShell. So almost every command is going to have an add dash noun, clear dash noun, copy, enter, exit. These are just the common verbs, and then you start getting down to some of these ones where when you're manipulating data, you can create checkpoints. I may have additional verbs that you don't have, and that comes down to the modules and things that I have installed within my PowerShell environment. My PowerShell environment has stuff for SQL, has stuff for Azure AD, has stuff for MySQL, has stuff for managing our EDR. So you may see some verbs in my list that don't exist in your list. So these are all of the verbs that are available to us. Okay? And we can also look at you can't do get nouns because, I won't get the ACL right now. Because it doesn't actually exist. Because to know all the commands that if I can spell noun, that's a product of the Florida education system there, guys. You don't have all the nouns, because typically if you want to know the commands, you'll use something like get help. And get help is going to say, well, this is how you get help. And I can continue, I can say update help, I can say save help, but I can also say get help dash new AD user. And now it's going to get me the help article about the new AD user. Now this is all available on Microsoft's website. What you're seeing here in the command is the same thing that you would see if you went to this link. But the nice part about PowerShell is that they've tried to make it self-contained so that you don't have to have a web browser constantly going out to the internet to look up all the commands and everything. You can use the get help to pull up that information. And so let's look at some of the syntax. So when you do new -AD user, I specifically use this as an example because this is probably one of the most common things that you'll see with PowerShell is account creation or account updates. So let's look through it. What you're seeing here is this is new AD user is our command. And then everything after that is what's called a parameter. So dash name, that's a parameter. And it's looking for a string. So when it looks for a string, it's looking for typically things to be enclosed in double quotes in PowerShell. You have two different types of quotes you can use, double quote and single quote. I will let Don go into the details of that and learn PowerShell a month of lunches because I still messed it up. 8 years in on PowerShell, I still mess up my quotes. Most of the time, I'm doing double quote everywhere because that allows for you to put variables and stuff inside of it and it treats it like a string. Anything in a single quote is literal. what is in that quote is what will come out on the screen, no matter what. So we have our parameters, and then we have our data types, strings, date type, booleans. This is what it's looking for. So boolean is true, false. Date time gets weird with PowerShell because you can put something in and say that it's a date time, and PowerShell is pretty smart. If it sees 11/7/2003, it's automatically going to try to convert that to a date time for you. But then when you are running stuff against Active Directory, like your last, like I want to know when was the last time that this account logged in, it returns it in multiple different types of date time. And you'll see it as like clicks from the UTC, which is going to be a ridiculously large number that means nothing to URI. It will show it in UTC, and it will show it in whatever your local time is. But by default, PowerShell, when it's grouping and crunching data and you're trying to run comparison, is not using the standard date times that URI would be able to look at and easily read. So sometimes I have found when trying to, hey, I need to know when was the last time this account logged in, because we're trying to do a security audit on it, or just know this person says that they haven't been able to log in for 3 weeks. Last login yesterday. Somebody is lying, and I don't think it's the computer. So just to understand, you will see some weirdness when you deal with date times, but PowerShell is generally smart enough that it tries to automatically set things up. Now, if you've been around for a little while and you've looked at the older version of the Cognos downloader, it used something called arguments. Arguments in scripting, which you'll see with bash scripting and some certain command line stuff like CMD, has to follow a specific order. So while we see here with the new AD user, the first thing it comes up with name and then account expiration date, you can actually do new AD user. I can say account expiration date. I can set that as the first thing, and then I can say, email address. I can go through with parameters. It doesn't matter the order. It just matters that you specify the parameter and then you add the information. So if I want to say, this mic is going to be this, and then I want the name, and by the way, that name is the name that shows up in AD for that AD object. I can say, this, I can do something like that. I give it my email address, I give it whatever name I want, and that is what shows up when this command would actually execute. There are certain things that are going to be required when setting up, and if you don't provide those, it will fail at creating the account. Most often I see this, and you might see this when looking through logs, with something like update AD user. Set AD user. The idea that Microsoft had and the creators behind PowerShell is, you and I think of, I need to go update that account. For whatever reason, that's not an update in Microsoft's world, it's set. And that, you have to specify and identity. That's a required field. If you don't provide that, I can say update, email address, and I can give it the email address, and it will give me red text saying, I don't know who you want me to update. The identity field is a required field. So, let's see if I know I'm not connected to my AD. Let's see if it'll actually give me there you go. So, because I haven't provided the identity, PowerShell doesn't automatically error out like it did there where I didn't provided a value for the email address. It says, I need to know who you're talking about. And if I said Sam Smith, now it's going to give me a different error of unable to find your default server. This computer is domain joined, but it can't talk to the domain controller, so it doesn't know where Active Directory is. This is a common error that I see, and usually when I see this, it just means, hey, the domain controller, a domain controller, is not reachable. Okay? Error text is usually pretty descriptive within PowerShell. It may not make sense because you get lost down here with you're starting to read this .NET notation, directory.management.commands. If you've done programming, if you've looked, that's .NET, that's Java-based, that's kind of C-based notation. Doesn't make sense. Typically, I'm looking at the first 2 lines of an error to know what failed. The rest of it is extra information. This is helpful for you when you have logs, and I've actually brought some of my logs with me because you'll see here, at line, character 1. So now you know what line of your script is also failing. So this is helpful if you continually see errors occurring at the same line. Maybe a variable isn't passing in properly. Maybe the command isn't written out correctly. So that's how you can begin to kind of debug and look at and make sense of errors. Is just realize those first 2 lines are what matter. And then the rest is just extra information. Like here, we get the at character 1 because we can't connect to the web server. So that's a fundamental problem. But up here, the problem started at character 12 because I didn't specify information. I didn't give it a string. It was expecting a string. I could even potentially just give it, can I give it just an empty string? Yeah, because that's a string. It's empty. It has no information. It's not evaluating. There's no check within the commands and PowerShell on specifically, hey, does this actually do what I need it to do? Okay? So let me error that out. When you're running commands, if you want to kind of clear the screen, you just you type out clear, and it clears all that away. I can't scroll up anymore. I can't see all of my previous errors or anything. This is really helpful. Maybe if you're trying to show your boss that, like, hey, look at how awesome I am at PowerShell. You did all the work to try to figure it out. You had all that red text. You cleared the screen, but you still have your command history. So if you know the last command you ran works for you, you can just press up and down to go through all the commands you've run while you're in that session. If I close this and open it, do you think my commands are going to still be there, yes or no? PowerShell actually writes all of your command history to a file that even if it doesn't exist, because you've cleared it or you closed that window, you can go back. It only goes back by default a certain amount of time, But here you see me starting to go all the way back into stuff that I was running back when I was at the school in PowerShell 5. I don't necessarily need to be running PowerShell 5. Like right here, we're going to use this as an example. Run git process on your machine. Now git process is going to show you a lot of the same information that you'll see when you open up your task manager and you look at your processes, right? Have you ever had a process get stuck that you need to kill? You open task manager, and maybe this is just a problem that I've had, and I'm like, you know what? Visual Studio Code isn't responding in task. I really want to close it. I really want to close it. No matter how much I press in task, it doesn't close. Has anyone seen that? Well, the beautiful thing that I have found is when I do git process and I say stop it, it kills it. Because for whatever reason, Microsoft in that task scheduler, when you use the GUI, is trying to go through and safely close the program and try like, oh, it's not responding. Do you want to kill it? Whereas when you run something like stop process, I'm just going to stop the process for Explorer. But I didn't tell it what I wanted, so I need to say the name is Explorer. Oh look, I just killed Explorer. Now Windows 10 is smart enough that it generally tries to just restart Explorer constantly if you stop it. Back in the Park days, because you couldn't have any pop-ups or anything come up on the screen, part of my login script stopped the Explorer process. Because then I didn't have to worry about some random notification down here in the task tray popping up and telling me that it's trying to run. I like showing real-world examples. So let's go back to some of these commands I've been running. So, is it not running right now? I don't have it. So it's not liking that I'm just giving it partially the name. So what I'm going to do is I'll enclose this into double quotes. I'm going to put an asterisk in there. Shift 8. That is a PowerShell wildcard. Okay? So now it should show me all of the processes that are anything Jabber. If I wanted to say, you know what, show me anything that has RA anything, it's going to show me that. This is really helpful. That wildcard works on filters, on names. I use it a lot in my scripting when I'm looking for Active Directory users. Or just, you know what, I know I'm looking for something, I have part of the name. This helps you get that data so that you can then further refine it down. Okay? Now you may be wondering, why am I looking at Jabra Direct? Why do I care about this? Because for the last, I don't know, 2 weeks, it likes to tell me I have an update. But when I try to install the update, it tells me that there is a process running preventing me from installing the update. Can't kill the process, like there's just something running. So what did I do? I got mad at it for being dumb. And I started going through and I tried to find anything that was from the log file that should have been touching the Jabra process that was preventing the update. So what first thing I did was I created a variable, file or folder path, and pointed it to the log. All variables in PowerShell will start with a $sign. That is the variable indicator for PowerShell. When you're in PowerShell 5, you put $sign and then a variable will show up green. In PowerShell, let's make this bigger. PowerShell 7. It's also green. Again, Microsoft is really big on trying to keep stuff backwards compatible. So if it was green in one version, they try to keep it green in another. Same thing with the, why did that not stick to the nice big 36? PowerShell 7. 6 in. Okay. Just believe me, the text is red for errors as well in PowerShell 7. Big on compatibility between the two. So when I set this, I now have things I can do with this variable. Variables also can tab complete. So don't worry about making your variable long or short. This isn't JavaScript where every variable needs to be X or A or I, or make your variables descriptive so that you know what it does. Otherwise, you will get stuck and go, what is that variable doing? ICD, like, sure, that's an acronym that you may know, but maybe somebody who's looking at tomorrow doesn't know. Or it made sense today that ICD for my acronym was in case computer destroys, I have a backup. Tomorrow I look at it and go, what does ICD mean? Because, I've slept since yesterday and I don't remember. Long variables are perfectly fine. This is an example of me doing camel case because I'm trying to be better about my own programming. If we went to the Arkansas K-12 GitHub and we looked at some of my old scripts that are on my personal or even the Arkansas K-12 GitHub repos, you will see that I am all over the place on my variables. As far as like, no, it needs to be really short and not descriptive, or it needs to be really long, but there's random capitals in there. I grew up in PowerShell. It's case insensitive. I go to developer meetings. I talk with devs. And we will be like typing stuff out, and I still randomly throw a capital in there, and then we wonder why the code doesn't work, and one of them reads through it, and they go, why is this capitalized here? I don't know, my fingers felt like A and shift. PowerShell doesn't care. Why does JavaScript care? Be smarter, JavaScript.
Are variables kept when you close PowerShell?
Yeah, no. Variable, and that's a great question. Variables are always locked to the session they're in. Now let's look at something that Craig and I have both started doing in our scripting. Okay. So I'm going to open this. My default PowerShell editor is not the ISE. I do not teach the ISE anymore. I strongly recommend everyone to use Visual Studio Code, mostly because there's really cool plugins that go along with it, And you can do really cool stuff like I can just right click in here and say format the document, and it doesn't matter if I've tabbed in 3 times or anything, it automatically formats it to what is considered best practice for me. So again, I am lazy. Please understand, I learned PowerShell to be lazy. I hope you learn PowerShell so that you can be lazy. I tell our systems teams, and I tell people all the time, don't underestimate how hard I'm willing to work today to be lazy tomorrow. Because if I can write some code today and work my tail off figuring that out, that means I get to be lazy tomorrow, and the next day, and the next day, and I really like being lazy. The problem usually with lazy people is that they never get to be lazy, because there's always something else, like, well, you made that so you can be lazy. What about this thing over here that you still have to work really hard at doing all the time? Well, I want to be lazy there too. All right, go figure it out. So, a couple things about, this is a clever project. This is what is on the Arkansas K-12 GitHub. You see some stuff up here that we put in here. You can, when you do scripts, you can do requires. Requires means that the script won't even run. Like if I tried to run this clever project in PowerShell 5, it will automatically error out and not even try to run because it's not running in PowerShell 7.1 or later. The next thing it looks at is, are these modules installed? Simply SQL module and the Cognos module. All this stuff gets installed when you follow the documentation that we've put on the GitHub repo when you install the project. Like it's a step-by-step, like do this, do this, do this, and you're good. Now let's scroll down a little bit. Now you see this right here. PowerShell has something what's called dot sourcing. In dot sourcing is a way to import our settings file. So we don't actually pass most of the variables, which the only variables that are being passed in that settings file, I'll open our sample settings because you guys don't need to see my actual clever information, is the clever username and the clever password. So if you want to pass variables from one script to another, you have to do this dot sourcing. Because when you call another script from a script, it's essentially opening a new PowerShell window, and none of the information that existed in the original window is carried over to the new window. That can be used to your advantage or disadvantage if you're not doing it correctly. But that's how variables exist. They're supposed to be temporary. So that if that session closes, it's gone. If I press up enough, you'll see that at one point I had a variable for Stewie. That's my default variable whenever I'm going through and trying to figure out something. We had students come back, some super seniors this past summer. We rolled over our domain. We changed everyone from rps.k12.ar.us in Google to rpsar.net. We migrated our email from Exchange for faculty and staff, and now we're 100% Google. A lot of work. We used to put our Google addresses in an AD attribute called extension attribute 1. That's what our Google tool looked at for syncs. All of our seniors that graduated, we did not migrate. We left them on the old because we, as a district, said seniors retain access up until September 1st. So that if they have scholarship or college information, they have access. We moved it out of scope for all of our sync tools so that they went automatically get disabled. We did everything that we could. So what happens when one of those students who was supposed to graduate last year ended up not having all the credits needed to graduate, and they decide to come back in September, October to do a credit recovery and finish? Well, none of their AD accounts got updated. No, so they, like, even if our infrastructure, our help desk moves them to the right places and reactivates them, my sync tool doesn't see because they don't have an email address. So I created stu.me, my default student variable, when I'm just quickly trying to find information. I set a filter, and I want to say, hey, show me everybody that is enabled, because I know our help desk technician trying to help the student has already re-enabled their AD account. But their Google account isn't enabled, and it's still showing the RPS 30. What's going on? I immediately know, because I'm the one that had to work on all of that back-end structure and manage the AD, what's going on. So now I just want to know, show me anyone who is enabled and their email address is not like our psar.net. And then I'm searching our student OU, and I'm bringing in the email address property. So I brought all that in, found out I had one student, and I just went and fixed them. I explained this process to our help desk technicians and our SIS coordinator, and told them they don't need to know, because this is such a rare thing that will not be an issue next year, or it should not be an issue next year. I really hope we don't have a senior that was supposed to graduate in 2023 coming back for credit recovery in 2025. But I like sharing information. I want them to know, one, why this was a problem and how they can fix it. They don't need to know the PowerShell commands behind it. I use PowerShell every day. Dwayne and Tony, our system admins, they use PowerShell a little bit, kind of like what some of you guys were saying. I Google it and I follow what Google shows me, but they're not PowerShell natives where their first thought isn't, let me do this in PowerShell. So that's where I am. I do almost everything here. So that when I found that one user, I didn't go open Active Directory's users and computers, find that person, open their profile, I simply copied their user principal name to their email address. And then I double checked, hey, are they a member of all the right groups? Well, yeah, because my automation that I've written for us automatically adds them back to all the right groups. So the only thing I needed to do was set the email address and be done. Did that entirely from PowerShell. This window is what I'm probably looking at 40% of my day when I'm doing that part of the job. But now, control, by the way, if you want to ever cancel a command, like if I am running a long command and it seems to be taking forever, or I know I typed something wrong, you can press Control-C, that terminates the existing command that's being run, or script, if you've called a script, or just exits out of whatever I've typed. Control-C, doesn't have to execute. But that stu.me doesn't actually exist. But if I type it in, it now exists. Like it's there, but it also has nothing associated, so it won't tab complete. But if I said stu.me equals blank, now I can tab complete it. So every variable, in order for PowerShell to hold on to it, has to have an equal sign and then something. It can be a blank something.
If you create a variable with a list like that, is there a way to scroll through it, or?
Yes. So let's do that actually now. Let's create a variable. Let's call it processes. We'll do equal sign get process. we've already seen what the get process command looks like. I'm gonna clear my screen. So now I have processes, right? If I run it, it shows me the same thing that get process does.
Now that's only gonna show what was captured at the time that you set it. It's
Yes.
not a,
It's not running.
it's not a live variable.
Yeah, it's not a live variable. It doesn't run it every single time. So it's a snapshot at that point in time. Every command has what's called default return values. So for get process, it's handled npm, pm, ws, cpu, id, si, process name. AD, the reason why when we're looking at that STU-me, I did properties email address. The email address is not considered a common attribute. PowerShell will say the common attributes are what get returned. Okay? I can actually do something like process dot ID. And it'll just give me all the IDs. So you can call from a variable all of the different common attributes or attributes that you've put into the variable. If I wanted to just see, hey, I want to see the third, actually this would be the fourth, because PowerShell, like most programming languages, doesn't start at 1, it starts at 0. So this is going to show me the fourth entry in the get process variable. I can also do process.count. So there's I have 282 processes. How many processes do you have running? 242, okay. My battery will probably die before yours. That .count is really helpful to use when you're trying to figure something out. Like I was trying to figure out when that student problem came to me from my help desk and our technicians, how widespread is this? Do I have a fundamental failure in my automation process that I need to go back and account for? When that number showed up as 1, okay, this is just an oddity, we'll take care of it. I did not break anything. I don't assume my code works and that I am flawless. I assume I'm an idiot and there's something always bigger going on. So I will create variables and then do a count real quick, and if it's a low number, I'm like, cool, I'm maybe smarter than I thought. But with these processes, you can pipe them, and a pipe is just a straight character. So we have a variable, right? And now we can pipe it, and we can do it into what are called some comparisons. And by nature, PowerShell treats everything as an object. It's an object-oriented language. Everything is an object. Even when you give it a list that has a single item in it, that single item becomes an object. It's just the way that their authors have treat their language. I can say where process. This is something that I still struggle with. The $_ means it should be passing in from the process for each of those things. This works some of the time. I always test when I'm doing this. Where object dot name equals, or actually let's not do equals because then you have to know the full name. We can do like, and I'll give it some quotes. Explore. Anything explore. We'll close that. And then, so now I've been able to take my full process list and pass it forward, and I can filter it down. One of the things that PowerShell will try to tell you, and Don talks about it in his book, is you want to filter as far to the left as possible. But sometimes it's not possible to filter on that first command, so you pass it and you pass it and you pass it. You can pipe this command several times. Now, if you want to know what something is, you can always do .get type, and it will tell you. Is it serial? Is it public? Typically, those are always yes. The only time I personally have never created a variable that will have been considered private, so localized. There may be a reason to do that. I haven't found it. And then it'll tell you that it's an object. But if I did, like, if we looked at stew me, which I created as just an empty string, tells me that's a string. But the base type here is still system.object. Because PowerShell wants to treat everything as an object. But because this has a base type of system.array, because it's a list of multiple things, it then says, well, it may be a list of multiple things, and each of those things is an object. And within that object, there may be strings, there may be additional objects, and it doesn't break it down all the way. Okay? Now that was a practical look at kind of the creating a variable, getting the type, and then piping it both into a filter so that I can filter it down by name. Now, Visual Studio Code will hate if you do stuff like this. GM. Does anyone in here have any idea what GM means? It's a shortcut. Alias. Well, what do you think it's an alias for?
Get something?
Get something, yeah. Verb noun configuration. But would this be helpful for you if you were trying to look at code? Okay. So let me run that again. I'm going to take our processes. I'm going to pipe that into get member. This is actually all of the information that is available under get process. Even though when we show the get process and we run that, it only shows those like 5 or 6 headings, right? This is actually all the information that is returned with get process. So we have the events, things that are being any of your alias properties. Like, what does SI mean? What does WS mean? This actually gives you that information. Even though when we scroll up here and we look at get process, right? And we see the handles, the npm, the pm, w, what does all that mean? Well, if I look into the get member, I can see npm is the non-page system memory 64. Then you begin looking down. All these properties are the things that are not being displayed. Like, hey, what's the exit code? Does it have an exit code? What's the page memory size? What's the site? These are all actual that's all in the get process command. It It just doesn't display in our window. Okay? So the two big commands and things that you can do with variables is get type so that you know what it is, because your types matter. Certain things matter when you're trying to manipulate a string versus an object, and we'll get into that after our break. I know we've been going for about an hour. I usually break at an hour and a half. And then the get members so that we can see all the different things that we can do with that command and information that that command can give us. So while threads isn't shown, right? But maybe I want to say get process dot threads. Notice it actually has all the thread information, even though when I do get process 3, doesn't show the threads or anything. But if I do get process 3 dot threads, there's all the thread information about that third process. So it all gets stored within the variable from that snapshot when you created it, that you can look at. So what do you do if you want to actually manipulate something there? Because notice within the threads is an object itself that has all of this information, right? So can we get member on that? Yes, we can. Because anytime you begin to see a list like this displayed, it means that it's an array and a system object, and there's going to be members in there. And so this is where you begin to get into this really weird, I say weird, because people aren't used to seeing it, dotting of variables and things, where you begin kind of sectioning out, and it starts to look like some Java or .NET based coding, because I'm taking my third process, I'm looking at my threads, and then I'm looking at my IDs. And so you can kind of systematically go through. This I do a lot for string manipulation. I also do this fairly regularly in Active Directory because I don't want to have to maybe parse through or hard code in all of the OU information. So I can bring in all of the OUs, and then I can say, throw all of the OU information, and then throw it into a for each loop, where maybe I do something like, let's look at that file or folder path, right? If I said split, and I tell it to split on a slash, I now have all of this information. So typically with AD, when you're looking at OUs, there's an equal sign. So you split on the equal sign, you're gonna have something like CN as the first line, as 0, and then object name, and then OU, and then the OU name, and then an OU, the OU name, the DC name, DC again, and so you can split it out. If I know I'm looking for, like, my OU structure goes building, I'll start at the lowest side, building, or grade, building, kind of building, like is it a middle, elementary, or high school, students. So if I know I need to look at just the building name, everybody's building name, I don't need the first OU equals, I need the second OU equals. So I could, using this as an example, that might mean I'm looking for app data. So I might say like folder name equals file or folder path dot split, so that we can split it out on our, that will give, if I do this, it gives me the same output that we just had, right? Folder. If I go up twice, I can say, but you know what? I actually just want you to give me the third return of that. And now my folder name is just that data. So using this dot sourcing, this kind of dot notation and manipulation of different strings is how you can kind of start going a little bit deeper with just your variables. You don't necessarily need to know right away or hard code, you know, here are the, for me at Rogers, I have 26 buildings and locations. When I was at Decatur, I had 3. I had a middle school, I had an elementary, and a high school. You know what my code originally looked like? Everything was hard coded. Middle school, elementary, high school. I didn't care what the name of the building was, because it was the Decatur Middle School, the Decatur High School, the Decatur Elementary. It wasn't Rogers Regan Elementary School. I don't want to have 26 OUs. For me, my AD structure matters, and the reason why I manage AD this way is Google still does everything based off of OUs. And typically when I'm applying a setting that is universal for all elementaries. This is what all elementaries get. This is what all middle schools get. This is what all high schools get. And if there's exceptions, I drill down and I can override on that individual OU and apply whatever exception needs to be there. Same thing in AD with group policies, and my management there was, let me apply it at the broadest level and then we'll deal with exceptions later. This is how I do that. Do we have any questions about variables, kind of this dot notion, being able to kind of go through? I know we've kind of thrown a lot out there so far.
How do you know when you need to use a pipe exactly? Like what? Is it only when you're searching through data to use?
So it's not just when you're searching through data. I do a lot of pipes with Active Directory users. So like, let me go back to the stew process. Let me clear the screen so that I have all that stuff off so that that stew me is up there.
I've always considered it passing the output of one applicant or one program to the input of the other.
Yeah. So like, if I did stew me at return 50 users, I could pipe that into a set AD user. The identity is going to be SAM account name. So it looks at, because it basically, this, when you pipe like that, it's automatically kind of doing like a for each or a for loop.
Mm-hmm. AD user of each. Okay.
And so, and now because set AD user has to have an identity. So now I've given it, said, now I want to say your email address is your SAM account name. I'll put that like this at rpsar.net. If I'm not, if I, and I'll do this a lot when I know specifically the change that I need to make or that I'm making, I've already tested, I know it's going to apply to these 50 users, I'm not worried about it, I just want it to go live, you know, I make the jokes sometimes with Craig and some of my other developer friends, like, my test environment is production, and my version control is Control Z.
There you go.
Brave man.
I don't like it. I try to not test in production. It's just
reality.
yeah.
It seems like the way. I mean,
So sometimes with some Active Directory stuff,
all programs are updated.
yeah.
None
And,
of them are shipped finished.
and I'll be honest, guys. Been working in PowerShell for 8 years. I have broken things. I have broken things at Rogers using PowerShell. And when I break something, my response to my boss is I broke it. No one knows it was broken because I immediately went in and fixed it because I realized I broke it. But if I am dumb enough to break it, I should be smart enough to fix it. That's my stance. But that's one way that you see pipe commands is you pull something in, and when you do that, you don't even need to set it as a variable. Because actually setting this as a variable, what it's going to do is it's going to get all those AD users, then it's going to pipe it into that command. If I run that variable, it's going to be like, I did that thing. But sometimes you might pipe that into a select command where I want to just select, which select is a shortcut for select-object, their SAM account name, and you know, I want to know what their email address is. Like, does it even exist? Because maybe there's something in that field, it's just not at rpsar.net. And so this would bring all that back. So rather than having the, when it was created, the SAM account name, the object GUID, the object location, the distinguished name on it, the user principal name, like it has about 8 different characters that show up by default. Email address is not one of them. Piping it to the select command limits the amount of data. Sometimes it's okay. Like, honestly, all this runs in memory. Having a ton of things, unless you're running out of memory, having all those objects in memory probably isn't a big deal. But if you're worried about performance, or you know I only need those 2 pieces of information to run all of my commands later, you can pipe it and you can only bring those 2 things in. And so that's how you kind of begin narrowing it down and keeping it constrained. The pipe is usually more for constraining of your data or what you're doing when you're creating variables, at least. All right, awesome. It is 9:50. How do you guys feel about a 15-minute break? Get some coffee, go to the bathroom, stretch your legs. We'll get back here. We'll start back up about 10:05.
You haven't checked in yet? Oh my goodness.
Well, so, I just got the elevator in the room right here.
I don't think she's in class. She's not checked in.
I'm never gonna do that right now, right?
Help, I need an adult. 10:05. What was that?
It's important to me.
I don't know about the rest of you, but I am highly food motivated, and when I am like tackling a hard programming challenge or I'm dealing with a weird logic issue, Skittles is my go-to. I don't know what yours is, but you need to find it because it will help you be a better PowerShell user.
Right.
And is it just like Skittles to the mouth. Like, the Skittles come out, they get dropped on the desk, they get sorted by color, then eaten by individual colors. You gotta bring structure to life.
Yes.
One at a time.
Mine is Lindor. I literally, on the way out the door, I'm like, I'm gonna need these.
So, Visual Studio Code, I use the PowerShell extension. Is one of the extensions I use. Another is called Prettier. It's a code formatter.
Say that one again. Premiere?
Prettier.
Prettier.
You'll see some Python and stuff in here that I've installed.
The TV's broken.
Uh,
Hey Chris, reach over and towel it.
I got your dog.
Okay, so
Oh, that was quick too.
we've got the PowerShell extension, and this basically just makes it so that what ends up happening is it can understand and know the IDE environment, so that it knows this is a command, this is a variable within, and then it'll give you, like, right now it's telling me that I have 2 different problems, and it even tells me what those problems are. Number 1, the variable clever host key is assigned but never used. We put the clever host key in there. If you use Destiny, how many people use Destiny library software?
We just
Yay.
started.
I think that knows.
Destiny changed their SSH keys twice in the last, like,
Weeks.
2 weeks.
Couple months.
Yeah. Yes, they did.
The only time I've ever seen that is when a attacker has infiltrated and is doing a man in the middle.
Yeah.
We talked to Destiny support. They assured us that was not the case.
Right.
But let's just be ready to hear about a data breach from Destiny. That's what I'm prepared for. The only other thing that makes this make sense is the new guy, the intern, was told to rotate the SSH keys. They did it on like a 1024 or 248 when it was supposed to be a 496. Like, they did it all wrong. Like, those are the only way that stuff makes sense to me. But yes, we put the clever SSH key into the clever project because sometimes this is in order for PowerShell, whether you're using SSH.exe or you're using an outside program like PuTTY, PSFTP, the first time it tries to connect, if it doesn't recognize the SSH key, it prompts you to interact. Well, if you're running in a script, it gets to that point, it hangs, and then it just dies because you don't get to interact with it. So you either have to manually connect and say, yes, accept that key, or you put it in and then you have something that writes it into the registry to automatically. We've put what the SSH key is supposed to be in the code so that if for whatever reason it ever comes up with something different, we're aware and we may have to update that if Clever ever updates their SSH key. But nice part about Visual Studio Code, and even if let me go back to my project, let's open this also in the PowerShell has what they call the ISE. This is what it looks like. I got made fun of for a long time, or not a long time, when I posted a screenshot asking for help to Spiceworks because I wasn't ready to make the jump to Visual Studio Code. And after ridicule from my PowerShell peers, I made the jump, and I'm very glad I did. So the ISE kind of does the same thing. It'll give you all of the different commands that are available over here. But what it doesn't do is it doesn't kind of tell you what problems or things may happen. If something was mistyped, like if I had an F in there, it's not going to tell me that that's not an actual command. So for everybody's sake, please use Visual Studio Code because it will help you not have errors. And then the other thing is it says, hey, the school year is assigned but never used. And this is a common function that I've created that Craig and I both use, and I also have thrown it up into Cognos so that I no longer have to set school years. It automatically does it for me. So we know that if it's July, between July and December, the school year is always the year plus one. Otherwise, the year is the year. And that's what we're doing here in this. And we're even going in and specifying that is a data type of an integer. We could say that's a string, but because we may want to do some addition or something to it later, forcing it to be an integer and declaring your data types is considered best practice.
Well, the plus one wouldn't work if it was a string, right?
It might, but but by that, instead of it adding, 2023 plus 1 is 2024, it might say it is 2023 1.
Yeah.
And instead of, because it's adding, it's saying that you have a string and you want to add the one character. So it's adding a character rather than doing math and adding to it. So PowerShell, prettier code formatter, and then another one that I highly recommend is this Rainbow CSV. Let me see if I have any CSVs that aren't going to be. Oh yeah, there we go. No one cares about DHCP. So, what Rainbow CSV does is it makes it really easy for me to see each column broken down. That way I don't have to open it. Yes, if I'm manipulating a CSV, I'm probably going to be opening it in Excel to do something in Excel. But there's been some data projects that I've worked on that
Never open CSV in Excel.
Right.
Never.
0 at the front.
Let's talk about this.
you have that issue.
Yeah.
You also have weird issues if the file is too large or you have too much data coming in that does it. And what we were doing is we were extracting data out of Cognos, but in order to get the data out of Cognos, because we're basically hacking Cognos, we were going from, we did a direct SQL query. We converted from SQL to XML to JSON back to SQL so that we could pull any table dynamically and squish it all into one row. And in there we were doing some replacements and stuff, and we started seeing some really odd behavior because randomly some rows would have less commas than other rows because there were so many null values on that one row that our replace function within the Cognos side was hitting and removing data. We need to use Rainbow CSV to find that because you couldn't find that looking at it in Excel because Excel wouldn't open it, and it was a weird one. It was weird, but Rainbow CSV, ever since then, I've been a huge fan of, not just for tracking down, but this. I'm looking at our DHCP scopes. I can quickly scroll through. It doesn't pick a million colors. It kind of has a certain color set and then starts reusing those. But it's really easy to know, okay, my nap enabled is going to be this color, and I can just scroll down through and see that.
Just enough difference to tell what the different columns are.
Yeah. Just enough so that because otherwise it just looks very easy to miss data in that CSV. There's one other one that may be beneficial that you may like to use, and that is this auto align. And it kind of does the same thing where it will automatically format like the PowerShell does, but you can align and make sure everything stays aligned if that's something that you care about. Some people want really pretty looking code. I am more of the mindset of I want functional code. And we also, both Craig and I are big on trying to put comments into the code so that if anyone's looking at it later, it makes sense to you. So that is your Visual Studio Code. You can actually integrate. I'm going to take some time and we're going to talk about GitHub a little bit. I know it's not PowerShell, but we're going to talk GitHub because GitHub matters for PowerShell and your version controlling. You can actually directly connect your GitHub to here, and it will show you your source control. And when all my scripts back at the district are on my script server, I connect this into that directory. I update a script there. I can push the update or not push the update because I'm testing it, but I know what I've modified. GitHub is going to be its own class entirely, but let's take a look at it for a minute. So this is my personal GitHub that I created 2015, 2016 timeframe. This is where I initially threw up all of my Active Directory stuff. I have stuff in here. Some of this is just stuff that I've pulled from other people. You can come in, you can actually see the code. This is my old stuff. I think I've gotten a little bit better, but I'm not ashamed to say this is where I started. You know, I want to search for disabled accounts, and then I want to move all those disabled people to a centralized disabled spot. Like, is this right? Like, yeah, but now I might put that disabled OU there underneath the employee OU, because again, if I have policies and stuff being applied to it, it can carry through. Or maybe I'm syncing that up to Google, and if that OU, that disabled OU is not part of my sync, it falls out of scope. And I don't like having to work hard, so I'm either going to map both of those so that my Google tool knows, because if that staff person comes back, how many of us have had a staff member leave our district and come back?
Never happens to us.
Their account gets re-enabled. Well, if they're in a spot that's outside of a sync scope, they're not going to get automatically re-enabled. Then help desk is called. And why isn't this working? And a big part of tech's job is based on trust, and we need to build systems that people can trust. And part of that is us designing it intentionally to work properly. So this just looked at, you know, here I have the OU, I've said this is where my central disabled is, and then I'm getting every user, regardless if they're enabled or disabled. That may not have been the best way to actually pull my data in, but I'm setting to variable users, and we're looking at our centralized disabled. And then I look at, you know, hey, let me get my Active Directory users filtered where their enabled is false and their given name isn't like something underscore. So in that environment, what we did is if we had a generic account or something that may get disabled, then that's fine because it's a test account. We started their last name with an underscore. That was our practice. Then we would find those people and we would move them to the disabled location. A lot of your Active Directory commands has this -what if. It's basically your way of show me what this command would do without me running this command. Now, because this is on my personal GitHub, I'm currently logged in with my work GitHub. I don't think I can actually edit, but I should be able to see the history. The only history on this is when I uploaded it. I have not made any changes to this file. If I come back and I look at my Active Directory accounts, this is the code that I wrote at Decatur, basically presented it at an ACOT, realized a lot of people weren't automating stuff, and I went, okay, well, let me make this as generic as possible and just put it out there, and hopefully people can figure it out. Now if I look at the history, you see there's an update 6 months ago. I've made minor updates and tweaks to it in that time, and if I come in and I look at this, it shows me this is what was actually changed. Craig and I use this a lot on the K-12 GitHub to blame each other when something breaks. Who broke it? What did you do? We can actually go in and see it. We can see exactly what we did. And in the public GitHub repo, we're able to see who applied that change. Because everything here is assigned to the person that committed the change. Now, I'm the only one committing changes on my GitHub, so those are the only changes that we'll see. And this is a project that, for the most part, I'm not actually updating anymore. But I'm still going in because I know people are looking at it and are using it, and I'm making minor updates. Like the last update was May 20th. And I wrote in here basically a new way to figure out how long does this script take to run. When I started at Rogers, our account creation process took over 30 minutes to run. We were updating data basically twice a day. I don't like that. So I've streamlined our Cognos reports so that we pull data every 2 hours, load it into our local MySQL database, and my automation runs every 2 hours. It takes less than 15 minutes for my new student and my update student and my Google Directory sync all to run. I'm still not happy with it, but short of completely redoing the entire process, I can't make it any faster. I've made it as fast as I can. And so for me, knowing how long something takes to run matters. And sometimes it just takes the time it takes. You can't help it. But knowing that, especially if you're trying to cascade or you're trying to build out schedules, knowing that this process takes 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes matters. So I just wrote in, and there's actually a way to do that in PowerShell already. You can do measure command, and then what command or script, and it tells you it took 5 milliseconds to run that command. It doesn't tell me anything about that command. It doesn't give me, it handles errors and stuff weirdly. I did a lot of stuff with measure command for a long time until I started discovering some of those oddities. And so then I switched over to just saying, hey, I'm going to create a new time span. I'm going to set a variable of, I started running at this time, basically before the script ends, that's the end time. Then I'm going to write out to my log, this is the time span so that I know. And I don't have to do the math then. Oh, the script started at 10:15. The script ended at 10:37. How long did it take to run? I'm lazy. I'll let the computer tell me. I took, what was it, 22 minutes to run? Okay, thank you. And it comes out in basically the same format that measure command does. Is it gives me the hours, minutes, seconds, milliseconds, ticks. This is what I was talking about. When you look at a date format in PowerShell, you might get ticks. if I told you something took 51,718 ticks, does that mean anything to us?
Sounds like a long time.
Not unless we're in an MMO.
But it means something to a computer that ticks actually matter. So we're interested more in the seconds, milliseconds, that information. And I could even pipe that into its own variable and select out and say, hey, only show me minute, and format it so that it only gives me the minutes, the hours, the minutes, and the milliseconds as like a typical kind of like 0.000000005 format. So I have a personal GitHub that I've thrown stuff up on. I reference it every now and then on sysadmin. I'd encourage everyone to have a personal GitHub. The classes that I did required me to post my Java project onto my personal GitHub. So I guess if somebody ever looked at this and wondered what languages does that guy know? Well, technically I have a couple Java projects. I have a Node.js, I think the Node.js is on here, yeah. You don't want to use that Destiny import. Trust
I don't
me.
want to use any Destiny import.
Destiny's terrible. Wow, what a nightmare.
But like this again was something that 5 years ago when I started doing all this made sense. And the other great part about this is my Rogers repo. This is all of my code. You will not see any of this if you went to github.com because it's a private repo. Private repos are now free. You used to have to pay money to have private repos, but you can now have a free private repo. If that script server running all of our automation and basically all of the data stuff for Rogers Public Schools was to catch on fire and blow up, I have all of my scripts backed up. And I know the last time that any of this stuff was updated. Like the last time I updated my Blackboard student information was on the 25th. And if I go into that, I can even see, hey, what did I actually update? And some of it is, oh, I updated something. Now, I would encourage people to do something more than, there was a bug, the bug is no more, there is no bug. That's not helpful. But it's, honestly, most of the time, by the time I get to the point where I'm updating the repo, I know there was a bug, I forget what the bug was I fixed, so I fixed the bug. I'm sure I could go into the history, dive into the history, figure out, oh, that was the bug that I fixed and document it better, but you know what, if I need the history, I can just come in here and look at the history. This is primarily done for me. No one else on my team is looking at this. I'm not sharing this information out with anyone. This is the one that you see all the time mentioned on sysadmin, or you'll hear other texts or Craig and I talk about, is the Arkansas K-12 GitHub. This is public. If you want to contribute, anyone is welcome to contribute to it. This is just where Craig and I kind of put out a lot of the stuff that we did. I updated this 3 days ago. I updated the read.me because I was installing the Clever project for somebody over the weekend. I was following my own documentation. And I got in here, and this did not work. Because I made a logic flaw. What we do, and this is nice because you can just copy and paste this. This is open PowerShell 7 administrator mode. You come here and you can copies all of it, and it runs it for you. So we install that simple SQL module that is required for PowerShell to work. We make the assumption that if you're installing this, you already have the Cognos module installed. And then we do an if statement. If test path, and we put it into parentheses. So just like math, stuff in parentheses, order of operation matters. Stuff in parentheses goes first. We're testing to see, does C script exist? If it doesn't, that's what the exclamation mark means. If it doesn't, then we're going to make the directory C scripts. Then we're going to go into C scripts. And then we're going to clone this project down. And then we're going to go into the Clever project. And then we're going to copy the sample settings and call it settings. And then we even tell you this is what you're supposed to do in configuring and going in and doing that. You go to https schools.clever.com, sync settings, and it will have your Clever username and password there, your SFTP username and password. You put that into your settings file. We can't automate that. At no point do we ask you for your Clever admin username and password. There is some configuration required by the end user. We assume that we've made this as easy as possible, that you are confident enough that you can open up that settings file, copy and paste the username, copy and paste the password. And then we tell you, just run it. And it goes in and we talk about how to set up a scheduled task. I went in and added this after dealing with the Server 2022. Quotes may or may not be needed around those arguments. Where we set the execution policy around the program script. Server 2019, typically wanted. 2016, definitely needed to have it. 2022, for whatever reason, no longer seem to care about the double quotes. It was an oddity I observed. I documented it so that if you were going through this and you're like, hey, my scheduled task isn't running, at least now we know. I have not investigated that anymore. And then we even say, hey, look at the clever.log file if you're seeing any errors. So Arkansas K-12 GitHub, and you can come in here and you can look at the commits, where 3 days ago I updated the README. On August 9th, I updated the README. I've been updating our README, which is our documentation. And then the last time we probably made actual code changes was when Craig switched it over from the Cognos downloader to the Cognos module over the summer. And for those that aren't aware, we are not supporting the Cognos downloader anymore. We only support the Cognos module. We leave both on there because people use both and have both. But Craig and I have made the conscious decision we don't want to have to continually support both. The modules where we're doing all of our work, so all the projects that we're putting on there are probably using the module to download. And again, all of that is here. We've tried to put it out there. We've tried to document. If you get back to your district and you are going through the documentation to install anything from the Arkansas K-12 GitHub, and you go, hey, I was following the documentation and this doesn't work, please let Craig or I know so that we can update it. This is a resource for us as a state. We want this is not Craig and Charlie's side project show that we're solely responsible for. You see, these are all the people that over here that have already joined the project and have contributed in some form or fashion. We don't keep it locked down. We just want to know who you are so that we can make sure that you're invited. It's not open to the public for anyone to just push code to, because we don't want anyone to be able in the world to come in and update code that we're all running that may break for us. Not what we want in the world. But lots of different projects on here. Some of it's stuff that probably everybody will benefit from. like the eSchool module, the Cognos module, which if you're not familiar with, we will be talking about on Thursday during the main conference. And then we have stuff like Hall Pass and Titan. Craig and I both do 1099 work for other districts that contract us to bring in automation. When we wrote Titan, or we wrote stuff to do Hall Pass, hey, everybody in the state, whether you use Hall Pass or not, doesn't matter. We all have the same SIS, we can pull the same information, and they have the same requirements for Hall Pass at Rogers as they would at your school district. So it's, for Craig and I, it's not that hard to write code to be fairly generic, have a settings file where it asks for your specific Hall Pass username and that information. And now we just took something that was proprietary for my district and made it a resource available for everyone. And that's something that we want to continue to encourage as a PowerShell community, as a community in general. There's a project on here, where is it? There we go. The hack extension, Craig had that developed. It's done in JavaScript, and this metal detector is a tool for tracking Chromebooks that John Pan from Bentonville School wrote. He wrote it in Go, which is Google's development. So, and same thing with Carl Sagan. It's their Bentonville's way of pulling Cognos reports. So, does basically the exact same thing as the Cognos module, or the Cognos downloader, more than the module, but.
It's a way cooler name.
What?
It's a way cooler name, though.
Oh, yeah. Look, Craig and I will never claim to have cool names for our stuff.
Isn't that the hardest part about programming, is doing good variable names?
Yeah. RTI scheduler is something that I don't know if you guys use. I found out when I got to Rogers, like one of the people behind it, former Rogers teacher, her husband was a programmer at Walmart, and they just went off and created RTI scheduler. It's a pretty cool RTI program. This is not a sales pitch for RTI.
Right.
Craig and I love them as developers. They wrote an API that allows us as outside developers to send them data and pull data back. One of the things that they started working on at the end of last year was people wanted attendance data in their program. Well, how do we get, what kind of attendance data do they want? Oh, they want to know if the kid is present that day. Okay, so 20 minutes before RTI runs, we can pull attendance data from Cognos, upload it to them, and it's now live in their program, and we've worked on it. And then some schools have said they take attendance in RTI, and they want to push that back to eSchool. Craig and I wrote a process to do that. Neither one of us have pulled the trigger, and I've told every district that has asked me, like, it is highly beta, do not recommend, because of the way eSchool handles attendance stuff. We can upload the data through an upload definition, sure, but it may not be right. So that's why attendance clerks exist. But it's really cool that that there's a third-party vendor. Clever doesn't do this with us. GGL doesn't do this with us. So it's one of the things that why I'm talking about them is you'll see stuff within this project that are directly resulted from districts talking to the vendor and the vendor coming back to Craig and I because they know we maintain this to get this updated to support the school districts. Some of the stuff is for school districts, not us. And none of the school districts that we've contracted with. But we will try to make sure the code exists because it's a public resource. And if we can, and Craig and I both like solving problems, so. One of my favorite things to do is to get 2 or 3 beers into Craig and just start throwing random PowerShell problems out at night. You want to see some fun? Just come hang around us after hours, and we'll be talking probably PowerShell or something, and cussing at each other, then going back to our rooms and writing some code to figure it out. On that clever front, remember how I said there was a logic issue here? My logic issue was I have this CD into C scripts within that test path. So it, like on my computer, C scripts already existed. So when it came down to the git clone, it cloned it into the base directory. Which, where is this base directory? C users Charlie.Weber. Everything within that project is using what's called a relative directory. So it's not hard-coded looking for C scripts, clever, to run, so that project would have ran just fine. But if you try to copy and paste this information, hey, run PowerShell 7, which is pwsh.exe, that would run. Execution policy bypass, because our code is not signed, we have to bypass the execution policy that it, by default is only trying to run signed code. And then we're telling it the file is, by the way, the file is located at C scripts clever.ps1. It was not located there. I'm not going to try to write documentation that says, by the way, that project may be in one of these 50 different places. So I went up here and I fixed it. I added an else statement, so if that path already exists, we come down to the else statement. We just move into CD to the scripts. I could have fixed it by moving this CD scripts to right before the git clone. So as you're writing code, just know that we will make mistakes, and being able to find those mistakes are important. Which brings me to something that PowerShell does, that I like to talk about, is logging. You have different ways of logging in PowerShell. My way, and the way that I do it most often, is to start transcript. So what start transcript does is literally everything that happens within the host window, whether you see that window or not, gets written to a text file. Here we're always writing it to clever.log, cleverlog.log. If you have CM trace from SCCM on your computer, you can open those .logs and CM trace and have it formatted that way. I open all my logs in Notepad++. This is an actual log that ran on my script server. And it gives you some basic information. So PowerShell's transcription is running. The start time, what does that even mean? Well, it's 2023, the 11th month, the 6th day, the 11th hour, the 43rd minute, at the 31st second. Not human, it's human readable, but not very friendly. The username running it, GCDS. The run as user is GCDS, because you can have those as different. The machine is my script server. It even tells me what version of Windows is running. The host application was PowerShell.exe. This is the directory that is running from. With my execution policy bypass, that's all in that task schedule sequence. You get the process ID that ran as. Then I get the PowerShell version, PowerShell edition, the different compatibilities. It's backwards compatible, but not forwards compatible. So if you looked at something that ran in PowerShell 7, it should have all of that on there. The OS build number, some CLI versions, so you get some information about PowerShell, the PowerShell environment that it's running in. And then it starts actually outputting directory object not found. Okay, well, why directory object's not being found? Remember how I said those first 2 lines are all that really matter? At C scripts, update students, line 46, character 19. So I could actually come in, and I've brought this with me. Student scripts, my update scripts, my update students. I can scroll down to line 46. I have an exclude set in here for off-site protection. That OU no longer exists within my AD environment. Looking at the logs, because I'm not the AD admin. All of my logs for update students have been about 8 KB, which means up until the 3rd. So I'm guessing somewhere around the 3rd, we made a change to our AD structure I wasn't told about. And now I have this error continually showing up in all my scripts. Is it breaking anything? No. Am I now aware of this error and going to go back and fix it? Yes. Because I don't like errors. I want my logs and my errors to be meaningful. I used to write a whole bunch of stuff out to the host. Let's look at it. Directory accounts. So in here, if I scroll down, when I'm doing all these checks and stuff, I write host, ID needs to be updated. So if it needs to be updated, I wrote, this is the person that needs to be updated. And then if I go down a little bit more, for all my new users, I wrote information out like, hey, here's their full name, here's what their username is going to be, here's what we're saying their password to be, and this is what building they're in. And then I also wrote out on a new line, hit create a new user, username and grad year. I just duplicated information in my log for no reason because I didn't know better at the time. But if I keep going down, like, okay, so we have some information about people that need to be updated and new users getting shown up in the log. That's cool, nothing too bad. Then I got down here, and I had all these write hosts where write host username added to grad year. I have 16,000 students at Rogers. That would have been minimum 16,000 lines added right there to the log file just to tell me I added this person to their grad year group. I don't need that in every single log. And if I kept going down even more, did I do it by the building? Oh, I was an idiot and didn't do it by the building at least. But going down, I have a write host, username is enabled. So on Saturday, what I would do is I would disable all the accounts and then re-enable the accounts. But this actually ran every single day. There's no check for, hey, is today Saturday? Did I disable all the students? Let me then go through. It automatically looked at all the students in the students variable, and for every single one of them, set them to enabled and wrote it to the log. So now I have minimum 32,000 lines telling me absolutely nothing. So while write host can be beneficial and shows up in your logs, I'm not writing host here to get this log information showing up of, hey, I errored out at line 4619. I do write out to the host, I'm creating a hash table. I started creating that hash table at this time. Why did I do that? Because I want to know how long did it take me to actually create my AD hash table. And then I say, hey, by the way, it's this year. And now I say, so I created the hash table at 11:43 a.m. I connected to my SQL server, pulled some query information, and then I started using those filters to filter down and see what do I need to do to these users. And that started 2 minutes later. So I know between the creation of my local AD hash table, querying my local database before I start doing, I need about 2.5 minutes. I like to know how long stuff takes to run in my environment so that I know what is normal behavior and what is abnormal behavior. This is how I'm doing it in my logs. And then I come in here and I say, hey, this kid needs to be updated. He's in the wrong OU. He should be here. Oh, but because he's in this RVL students, that's excluded from moves. So while I know he's in the wrong spot, I'm not moving him, and I'm telling myself in the logs why he's not getting moved. So if I'm not there this week, right? If my systems team says, this student was re-enabled, this student is, like, what's not working? What does the log tell you? And all of this is done through that start transcript and end transcript. And then at the end, it stops running. And as far as what it looks like in the code, is I have that start transcript at the start, and then I go all the way down to the very, very end of everything that's run. And basically the last thing that it does is it stops the transcript. And then if I want, I can email that log to myself. And then it exits the script. So look, that's one way of doing logging. Now, PowerShell is an incredibly powerful tool. You can do a lot with it. There is a module out there, if you've never heard of it, called Metasploit. It is all about hacking and attacking your network. It runs entirely in memory. There is nothing ever touching disk. So depending upon what kind of antivirus solution you're running, it may not get detected. But Metasploit is made for the good guys, not the bad guys, but the bad guys do use it. There's also one out there called Bloodhound that's kind of designed to help you do your own internal pen testing. Now, usually when I talk about PowerShell and PowerShell security, people go, well, I'll just block PowerShell. You can block PowerShell.exe on your endpoint machines. It means, though, that if you're using Intune or SCCM and any of your install processes need to call a PowerShell script, they won't work. By the way, that does not stop attackers from running PowerShell on your machine. It stops you from running PowerShell on your machine. There are over 12 different ways to run PowerShell without calling PowerShell.exe. The only way to truly stop PowerShell from running on your machine is to block system.automation.dll. If you do that, please tell me, because I want to know what breaks. The cybersecurity folks at Walmart will not block system.automation.dll. I have good friends there. Some of you guys may know a guy named Faisal. He's part of their cybersecurity team.
I'll just do it.
You can't help it.
We'll see
You
what
can't help
happens.
it. He's like, I got it.
He's like, I'm logged in. I'm blocking it. I'm blocking it. So
We'll report later today.
But what you can do is PowerShell transcription runs. You can set group policies so that PowerShell transcription runs no matter what, anytime PowerShell opens. And then you can point that to a centralized server so that ideally all of my machines have the ability to talk to that server, that file share, and so all of it writes to that one spot. Every single time PowerShell runs, I get a log. So you have PowerShell transcription, which we use for logging, and then you have something called PowerShell, it's another trans. Transaction, I think. I said transaction. It's been a while since I set that up. But there's basically two PowerShell things that you want to, transaction and transcript. So the transcript tells you everything that runs in the console window. Transaction logs every command ran. So even if I was to write malicious code, I was to encode it, encrypt it, and send it and run it, the transcript will show the encrypted code running. The transaction breaks down and says, actually, this is the specific commands that all of that code is running. So you get both of those happening in your environment to a centralized server, and then you can monitor that server, those file shares. When I was at Decatur, the only computers that should have ever been running PowerShell was my script server and my desktop. I did have some SCCM processes that would run PowerShell, but for the most part, that was it. And so I wrote basically a checker that looked at that directory, and if a computer name did not, and I was using that dot notation where I brought in all those file names, and then I parsed it out and said, hey, if that name contains anything other than this computer name or that computer name, send me an email. I want to know who's running, what machine is running PowerShell. Maybe, and again, like if it's an SCCM path sequence, I know I just pushed an SCCM path sequence. But if PowerShell is being run on one of my esports computers at 4:15 in the afternoon, I want to know who that kid is.
Yep.
I want to know what they were doing. And while it may be a discipline issue that needs to be turned over, maybe they opened PowerShell and they were just running paint. Does that mean that I need to blow up on that kid and report them and go full nuclear? No. But if I see like, oh, they're running, like they're setting the DNS to a public DNS. Well, why did I fail on my firewall rules to allow an outbound DNS other than, those are different discussions. But you can see everything that they did. PowerShell is available for all users. How many of us have secured our Active Directory environment? Have you? Are you sure?
No.
Active Directory by default, any user can query Active Directory. So your students who are non-admin users can install the Active Directory module because it doesn't require admin rights because it all runs in memory. And then they can query Active Directory. And they can get AD information. Again, knowing who that student is so that you can hire them as an intern is probably nice. And there may be, especially as we talk about cybersecurity classes and some of the CTE classes coming out, there may be more opportunities for kids wanting to do stuff like that. So I want to make sure that while we know about tools like GitHub for our version control and that we can keep stuff backed up, and we know about logging, and we can talk about logging and how useful that can be in debugging your own code and being able to go back and look at it. Also knowing about the security and some of the implications so that you're not just marching in thinking that this is sunshine and rainbows. I treat PowerShell like I treat McDonald's French fries. I love it when they're fresh and they're cooked right and they're salted just perfect. But I also know that if I'm going to McDonald's, I'm more than likely probably getting 5 or 10 minute old fries, and I'm just setting myself up for disappointment. PowerShell is an incredibly useful tool for you. You're learning to use it, but I don't want you to just see sunshine and rainbows. I also want you to understand some of the practical sides, and so that you can defend against it. That you can go in with the knowledge to be able to do some stuff about it. But GitHub, strongly recommend doing some courses, whether it's through LinkedIn Learning, YouTube, whatever. I don't even use GitHub fully to its full content, full capabilities. Neither does Craig. Neither one of us are GitHub experts. We just know enough to put our code there so that we have backups of our data, of our code. And there are some common mistakes that people will make in there. But it's okay, because we're all learning and we're all growing together. So let's jump back into actual PowerShell, right? Like, that's why we're here. We're going to get used to using these things. So we've talked about some variables. We've talked about going through and querying some data, some basic data. We have that, I have that file or folder path. And now if I want to say, I can do git history. And this shows me the last 40 commands that I've run. But what's not in there? What did I do with that file or folder path? And I can tab up through this until I find that. Which this is what I did. I did test path equals fault. And then, what it does is it looks to see, does that log file exist? Yes or no? I didn't get that warning, so I know it exists. The lock process, and then I'm running this CMD command. I'm not a CMD expert, I Googled that. And I'm trying to find that, and it's supposed to tell me, this is the process that was locking Jabra and preventing the update from running. You guys see the same output today as what I got when I ran it. Which is really perplexing when a program's trying to update itself, saying something's locking the file, and you can't find what is locking it from updating. So I did what every IT person does. Turned it off, turned it back on. Tried to run the update again. It said it couldn't update because there was a process locking the file. I said, you know what? I have more important things to do with my day than make sure the software's up to date, so I'm going to go back to doing my day job. One of those practical things. Another very practical, so where PowerShell tends to make a lot of sense and will do a lot of filtering and stuff with is AD commands. I think you'll see a lot of documentation on that on my GitHub, on the internet for just manipulating AD, sending stuff to AD. The other side is Windows event logs. How many people have tried parsing Windows event logs? Okay. Let's bring up your event viewer on your computer. Let's just look at the Windows security log. This is something that I've done on domain controllers a lot because domain controllers is going to have the login information for every user on every computer. Now, if we're Active Directory experts, we know that when a user logs into a domain, their information gets written to the domain controller that responds the fastest. And so you actually have to query all of your domain controllers if you want proper information. If you look in Active Directory, it has a last logged on date. So again, if I'm trying to figure out, a teacher's told me that they haven't been able to log in at all today. And I look at that last login date field in AD, that date is any day within the last 2 weeks. Because that field in AD does not sync. It syncs between the domain controllers once every 2 weeks. So the domain controller I'm querying, DC1, may have the date from 8 days ago. DC2 might be 3 days ago, and DC3 would have the most recent one. That doesn't sync by default. So I'd either have to query all of my DCs individually to know the last logon date, or I'm looking at the event logs. But knowing their last logon date doesn't necessarily tell you what's going on. So you have to ultimately parse down into the logs. Now, you can filter this log here, right? But how many people have played with the event viewer within Windows? Is it a good experience? Does it work quickly? There's laughter going on. I think you guys know my answer to that. It's going to be PowerShell. Because let's just look at, I'll take this 5379. So let's filter this current log to 5379. You can pick any event that you want on yours. So here's all the events going all the way back. And because I'm looking at just my computer and my one event log, it's pretty quick. But your domain controllers that have event logs that can be multiple gigs for a single day or even hour, depending upon how active your Active Directory is, this does not run quickly. I can actually come here and do get event log, log name, security. And it's querying all of that data in real time quickly. And it's going to go through, it queries the entire thing. We can just let this run. I'm going to press Control C because I don't care. I believe it's event. So let's see. I can do computer name. Well, I'm only querying on my computer. But the nice thing about this is I can actually run get event log, log security name from my computer, and get my domain controller's security event log. I don't have to RDP in to the domain controller. As long as my PowerShell has access, it's called PowerShell remoting, it can remotely query that log. So I don't need computer name. So I can do newest 10. So there we go. Now instead of pulling the entire log, it can just show me the newest 10. And now I can also see my headings. I have my index, my time, my entry type, my source, my instance ID. Okay, well, here it's called instance ID. What's it called up here? So if we clear that filter, I say filter current log, it just says all events ID. It's not event ID, it's not, we can put in what we want, 5379, and it brings it in. But in PowerShell, I need to know that I'm looking for my instance ID. So I can say instance ID 5379. And now, instead of showing me the 10 newest, period, it's showing me the 10 newest instance ID. And now I can also pipe that and say select message. And then because that message is longer than the default output range that's going to show up here, it truncates it with those dots telling me there's more there. But I now have something in PowerShell that I can begin manipulating through, showing this is like credential manager credentials were red, blah, 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 blah. I can now quickly create scripts or ways to filter through that. And so we selected the message, and maybe we want to just do newest one. Does that still doesn't give me everything, right? But what happens if I set that to a variable? Does message show me the full thing? No, but if I do message.message, now I get the full message. Because again, PowerShell, everything is an object. So the message, when we set it to a variable, give event log name, security, we're bringing in the newest one, and we're looking for a specific instance. Now, this gives me like a truncated version. But when I go into the actual object that was the message, I see the full thing. The SID, the account name, the domain, the login, the read operation. And then this event occurs when a user performs a read operation on stored credentials in Credential Manager. Okay? So, can I, to your question earlier, could I parse through and try to find where a specific account name there? Well, yes, because I would have to have that set, and then I have to come in here and do a where object. And do contain like. Contains. Let's see if that works. So that's not going to work because it's looking for the specific property. So this is where I would need to go, hey, what is my members here? So, okay, account name is what I'm trying to look for, or maybe the subject. So this is a system.string. So this whole data type is a string. So I'm no longer dealing with an object. This is all a string. And these are the methods that I can run on it. So notice nowhere in here do I get to say I can pass that into the where object, because we're out of an object now. We're into a string. So the where function won't work on filtering down to that specific account name. But what if that was a message.message, right? What if I do just on the entire variable? Well, now I can turn it into a string. That's what the message property is. And the note property is there. So you have the methods, those are things that you can do to that variable. And then the property is all that information. So unfortunately, trying to parse down into that specific text to find a specific username based off of an event ID is possible with PowerShell, but you're getting into a fairly complex data set where I've got to bring all those messages in. I have to know that they're all a string, and I have to begin filtering through those strings to look for a specific item within that string. And then output and do a bunch of other conditional aspects on that. So while it's helpful to be able to query into your Git event log and these things, I'm trying to show you guys the real world side of the PowerShell management for you on what you'll actually be able to use and do with it. But knowing the limitations. So querying event logs is super helpful. There are websites out there dedicated to just telling you what the different event IDs are, and so that if you're into the cybersecurity side or you're trying to help figure out a weird issue, you can start by knowing the event ID, querying and looking into it. Knowing the user, you can then build out those. I would go to ChatGPT. Let's do that. Let's see what ChatGPT tells me today. I believe it's just chat. Log in. Because if you're not aware, ChatGPT can only requires a phone number. It's off the screen for a second. I want you guys seeing how long or short my password is. And also that I can't type it right. Just a verification. Oops. It's me. It's me. Duplicating. Okay, there we go. So what kind of question do we want to ask ChatGPT in related to PowerShell? Is it going to be something like, using PowerShell, how would I query the Windows security event log for a specific username? And so let's look at this code that it just gave us.
It just made that ridiculous easy.
It does. Maybe.
Yeah, if it's right.
File test.ps1. Yeah, let's drop it there. Okay. Oh, is it really that easy? I get when event log, where object, properties. So this is where we are piping over all of the properties. We're not limiting it down to a specific. But number 6, which is really the 7th property, equals username. Okay, let's try that. Except for we'll actually put a username here. And so this is going to take a long time to run, because what's going to end up happening is we're getting the win event log. Remember how earlier I said you want to filter as far to the left as possible? So what happens first is we're getting the win event log security. All of the security log is currently coming in and getting stored in memory. We're just not seeing it run on the screen. And once all of the log is brought in, it's going to push all of that data forward into our where object. So maybe I should cancel that. And PowerShell in Windows is really good at managing that memory. And say, newest. Oh, it's giving, it's, okay. We're doing two different events. We're getting win event, not event log. So now I can go back and say, can you do this with get event log? Okay, cool. What's that actually look like there, Mr. ChatGPT? Okay, so now we're getting the get event log, log name security. Okay, that's what we were running earlier. Replacement strings. What? Okay. Was that one of our methods we saw? Replacement strings? Message, get member. Okay, it's not there. But what if I did message, dot message, get member, is it there? I don't see a replacement string there. So, is this going to work? Well, let's try. Here we'll add newest.